It's helpful if the kid is already a little vocal. A lot of the kids that we're charting on the lower trajectory are less vocal, or sometimes basically mute. So that can be a problem. So SSP is sometimes a good option, but we've tried it at our center and not always had the best results. So we're still looking for other ways that we can work around that problem. And then kind of the fourth, which came about in the 90s, is the MAND model. And so the basic structure of the MAND model in its original form was, let's set up a situation where the child is likely to vocalize. So let's say we are sitting across from them at the table, we put some reinforcers just out of reach, and anytime they make a sound, then, and it matches kind of the specific reinforcer, then we'll provide access to that. And so you're starting out in kind of a MAND context. Like we can shape up MANDs in that context by waiting for them to vocalize and then using shaping. And then when we try and go into the echoic side of things, now the kid is reliably saying the S sound for Skittles or something like that. And so we set up that same situation. They make the S sound, and I'm going to repeat the S sound, and then I hope that they will one more time echo the S sound back. And so we're adding an echoic component to a MAND context, and may also be a bit of a tact because we might have the Skittle present. And so it's kind of working off of different operants to get to the point where, okay, now I'm going to stop showing you the Skittle beforehand, and I'm just going to say the S sound, and then if you repeat it after me, you get access. And so that's taking advantage of a MAND repertoire to kind of build into the echoics. And that's what we kind of use as our basis for our procedure, though we try to simplify it or manipulate it a little bit in order to make it more likely to work with even these the lower functioning children who may not have all of the prerequisite skills necessary for success with the standard MAND model. So I'll describe our approach in detail in a slide or two. Our purpose, as I've said before, is help the lower 10% acquire some of these important skills. Auditory discrimination is a big one, as well as vocal imitation. Those are both components in an echoic context. And so we're trying to do it simply, in a way that's conceptually sound. And the biggest thing is we're trying to eliminate the need for prerequisites, because we're working with kids that are not doing very well in a variety of areas, and so they don't often have those skills that are strengths to build off of. And in our lab, we're basically calling this the molecular approach, is what we've coined that. So let me give you a rundown on my procedure, and then I'll show you some graphs, and we'll talk through it a little bit more. And if anyone wants a more specific write-up, I'm more than happy to send you copies of my dissertation if you enjoy reading dissertations in your free time, like you all do. Given that we only have about 20 minutes or so here, can't get into too many details. But let me give you a quick rundown of how we adjusted the MAND model for our specific intervention here. So in what we call phase one, this is where we're trying to eliminate any need for prerequisites and keep things very simple. So we're in a free operant context, and by that I just mean that I am not providing any sort of intentional SDs for the child to respond. So as far as the setup of this environment would go, it can be as simple as you're in a room, there's hopefully no distractors in the room, and hopefully it's quiet. And you'll see on the video that we got better at that as time went by. Early on, we're out in a room with multiple kids and it's a little loud, and then we get better at finding quieter areas. So we're in a room, no distractions. The only reinforcers available are the ones that the experimenter, in this case me, can control. If it works out, if the kid already has the ability to sit nicely in a chair at a table, then go ahead and do that. If not, you can set up the environment however will work best for you. And so the only reason I am there is to provide access to reinforcers when a certain behavior occurs. Other than that, I don't need to be present. I could have a machine that drops the Skittle into the room if I wanted to, but that's not very personal, so we'll go with me. So in this free operant setting, we're just using shaping and reinforcement to try and increase any vocal behavior that we can. because oftentimes these are kids that are not making a lot of sounds in general, there's not a lot of babbling, and so it's going to be difficult to capture and shape non-existent sounds into echoic behavior in the future. So we're sitting there and I'm not doing anything, and when the kid happens to make a sound, then great job, here's your Skittle, or here's whatever. And you can use tangible items, social reinforcement, whatever is most powerful for the child. So we're not worried about pairing specific sounds with specific reinforcers. So that's our first departure from the traditional MAND model, is we're just trying to increase any sounds that we can using whatever reinforcer is most powerful at that given point in time. And what we saw with 2 out of the 3 participants, and what I would expect to see as kind of like hopefully the typical example if you ran this type of procedure, would be that we get what we're calling MAND-like patterns of responding. And so what I mean by that is, at first, in the first couple sessions, we're sitting there and the kid is used to the tutor giving them things to do and saying things to them. And so the fact that we're just sitting there might be a little weird. And so then the kid happens to make a sound and we get the reinforcer. And for the first couple sessions, that's just how things go, where the kid every once in a while just kind of makes a sound because there's nothing else to do, and then they get a reinforcer. But what we'd hope to see pretty quickly is that the child starts to make sounds in a more purposeful manner. Sounds are what's producing reinforcement, so they start making sounds more quickly, more rapidly. And when I say MAND-like, what we often see is that we start to get some accompanying behaviors that make me think there's some kind of manding going on, even though it's non-specific. So they might be orienting towards me more reliably, they might be pointing at my hand that's holding the reinforcer, they might hold their hand out open like, hey, give me that thing. And so the specific sound that you hear just depends on whatever happens to be most prominent for the child from the get-go. In the video you'll see the kid going, guy, 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 and that just means give me whatever you have right now. So there's no specific MAND going on there, but it is kind of a MAND-like context where it's happening. And so that's what happens during our phase 1. We're just trying to increase the amount of sounds that a kid will make in a given session, and it's okay if it's just the same sound over and over again. But eventually we want to move into a echoic procedure, so we want to increase the variety of sounds that the child will make so that we have a couple different echoic targets. So phase 2 can consist of a couple different ways you might do this, but as behavior analysts, we're all familiar with the concepts of extinction and reinforcement and shaping. And so in phase 2, we're putting dominant sounds on extinction on different schedules, trying to promote a greater variety of sounds that might occur within those sessions. And so our goal there, and I don't have a hard and fast rule for when to move out of phase 2, but it seems beneficial to have probably at least like 3 different sounds that the child has made consistently in those sessions in that kind of MAND-like context. Once you have that, and that's still free operant, still just sitting there, except now in phase 2, not every sound is resulting in a reinforcer. Then we move on to phase 3, and this is where we shift to establishing echoic stimulus control. And so this is kind of a shock for the kid, because now I've shown them that, hey, we just sit here and do nothing until you make a sound. But now we come in and I'm going to make a sound, and they're going to be like, wait, what the heck's going on? And so what we do is we see what the most dominant common sound is, and then I'm going to, within that session, now I say that sound every like 15 seconds or so. The first time they repeat that sound after me, and that's why I'm picking the most dominant sound, because even if it's not under echoic stimulus control early on, at least it's likely to occur quickly after I make my sound, then they get access to a reinforcer. And so we're running one sound in isolation there, whatever their most dominant sound is, and then I'll show you on the graphs how we build in additional sounds as we improve. But the idea is that you're just providing this dominant sound, waiting for the next time the child makes the sound, and then providing a reinforcer. But if the child makes the dominant sound when I haven't made the matching sound beforehand, then it doesn't produce reinforcement. So we're shifting to a clear echoic context in this phase. So some of the differences from the standard manned model are we use non-specific reinforcement. We're not pairing it with anything, we're not pairing specific sounds with specific reinforcers. We're holding off on SDs until we get to the echoic phase, and we're deliberately training that first echoic in isolation. So I'm just starting with the most dominant sound. Yes, that could cause some discrimination problems later on, but for these kids, we're mostly worried about trying to shift that context to be an echoic. So this is my participant, and I have to fly through some of this because I'm already a little over time. So Layla is the one that's staying consistent. The rest of these folks have decent vocal verbal behavior already. So she was 3, and we included her because she had had trouble on previous echoic procedures, wasn't demonstrating auditory stimulus control, but she did have some good basic prerequisites. So on the pretest, she got 1 out of 21 echoic responses, and that was delayed, and it wasn't really clear it was under my control. So these are the graphs. I'm just putting them up here to scare Dr. Malott because I'm going to put smaller versions next. This is the simple way to look at what happens here. So on the y-axis, you have reinforced responses per minute. So this is any sound she makes that's appropriate. Sometimes that doesn't include things like screaming or crying or burping or whatever the case may be. But what you'll see is in those first 3 sessions, responding is basically at an operant level of about 2 per minute. Starting in session 4, we saw the manned-like pattern of responding occur, and so responding is jumping up, and so she's making that sound consistently. As soon as she's done chewing and consuming the edible, she makes it again and holds her hand out, and so she's kind of getting what's going on, like, oh, this is how I access reinforcers in this context. This is our phase 2 data where we're putting certain sounds on extinction, so I have to fly through this, I apologize. But in the blue, you have her first dominant sound, which is we, which we put on extinction, and you see now we're getting like 20 responses per minute because she's sitting there going, we, why isn't this working? And so we start to see some different sounds crop up over time. Guy becomes a common sound, and O pops up a little bit later towards the end. So we tried a couple different ways. We worked, did some lag schedules as well. Then we had those sounds that we had heard consistently, so we moved into our echoic phase. So at first we're running Guy in isolation, and she picks up on that pretty quickly, even within the first session, where I say Guy, she repeats it after me, and then as time goes by, she gets much better at not saying Guy unless I've said Guy already. Guy maintains throughout all these sessions that mastery, it's just not craft. Then we introduce we, and we start to get the discrimination between the two. So it's a little tough there at the start. You see 2 zeros because she's either not responding, like what is this novel sound that you're saying to me, or she's responding with the other mastered sound Guy that we were just working on. And the same pattern holds true for O. But she gets up to mastery level with those. We had trouble getting a 4th sound because we hadn't had a 4th dominant sound occur already in the free operant conditions. So we tried to go back, it didn't really work, we went back to phase 3. Big picture, by the end of it, we had slowly introduced new targets, and her post-test data is up near mastery levels, and we start to see generalized echoics. So it wasn't smooth sailing. I could talk for another 20 minutes on what her particular issues were, but that's the general process we would hope to see, is that as you get echoic responses to those dominant sounds, you can slowly start to add in novel sounds that are appropriate at an early intervention level, simple sounds, not too difficult. So I'll show you the video real quick, and then we'll go through our discussion.
Say ba.
So see if you can pick out the different phases.
Ba.
This is pre-test. She knows she's supposed to do something when a tutor says something to her, but she doesn't do sound. She's trying arms up because that's probably been reinforced previously. This is early in phase 1, so I'm not doing anything. Still trying arms up.
Good job.
So she makes a sound, doesn't matter what the sound is. And now she's going to go, I'll just repeat it real quickly. See if you can tell what's happening here.